Okay, a disclaimer. I'm really, really enjoying this book, despite how snarky I'm going to sound in summarizing it. Okay, chapter 45. What shall I do with myself? Parson John thinks that with the separation of Walter and Mary, the presence of Miss Brownlow at Dunripple, and the money that might be coming to Walter due to the illness of cousin Gregory, the heir, the family situation could be settled. He tells the news to Miss Marble with relish, but leaves it to her to tell Mary. Miss Marble agrees with the parson that the best thing that could happen was that Walter would marry Edith, this finality allowing Mary to move forward. Miss Marble cautiously informs Mary of the situation. Isn't it nice that Walter doesn't have to go to India? Mary silently wishes she'd known all this sooner, as the necessity of Walter's going to India was the cause of their separation. But she tells her aunt that she would not prevent his marrying if she could. She then tries to assure herself that this is in fact the case. Sore at heart, Mary thinks she should now look to do what is right, not what is pleasant. What is right turns out to be spending the summer at Bullhampton. Chapter 46, Mr. J. of Warminster. The vicar had rejected Mr. George's offer to help his sister Carrie by giving her £15, which would have paid for more than a fortnight at Mrs. Stiggs. North Americans, that's 2 weeks. Mrs. Fenwick is concerned that Frank will get into trouble visiting a girl of ill repute. Trollope had reason to know that the virtuous actions of virtuous men can be misinterpreted. Mr. Fenwick was not the first Englishman to manifest his Christianity by trying to save fallen women. Mr. Gladstone was known to walk the streets every night after Parliament recessed and talk to prostitutes, urging them unsuccessfully to go into another line of work. He was more successful in having improper thoughts during these encounters, for which he would flagellate himself. Rather than avoid occasions of sin, he sought them out. But I will draw a veil over Mr. Gladstone, and who this all happened before this book was written. So, although not convinced himself, the vicar assures his wife that only people like Lord Trowbridge would think ill of him, and even he, as a gentleman, would not condescend to spread a malicious report that he himself did not believe. When he next returns to Salisbury, Mrs. Stiggs predicts that Carrie will not last much longer. Carrie does not do much to pass the time, except to frequently state that it would be best to kill herself. The vicar still believes Carrie belongs at the mill, but after Mrs. George's heated observation that people do not like to be dictated to by a clergyman, the vicar didn't dare take Carrie there unannounced. He went instead to see Mr. Brattle's son-in-law, Mr. J. the ironmonger, although he knew his chances were slim with the man who would not even stand bail for Sam. Mr. J. was a prosperous, church-going, respectable man, but he did not want any involvement with Carrie. He had already been hurt by being related by marriage to someone who had disgraced her family. He thought the best thing would be for Carrie to die, after having repented, of course. He advised the vicar not even to try talking to his wife, who was too delicate to withstand references to the subject of Carrie, her sister. No relation to Sister Carrie. Chapter 47. Sam Brattle is wanted. Jack Burrows, aka the Grinder, and Lawrence Acorn were found in San Francisco, but Sam is still at large. With his bail money and Sam's reputation at stake, the vicar visits Carrie yet again to find out if she knows where Sam is. She assures the vicar that the Grinder committed the murder, Acorn was with him, Sam had nothing to do it, and she wishes she were dead. After a hearing before the magistrates that results in a continuance, there is a row. Sir Thomas Charles, Charlie's, I don't know how to pronounce that, Don. Anyway, referred to the vicar's unfortunate connection with Carrie, and Mr. Gilmore fired up. Pressed by Gilmore, Sir Thomas says his comment was based on information from Lord Trowbridge that the vicar visited a woman whom he was maintaining in lodgings at Salisbury. Lord Trowbridge's words may have been accurate, but Mr. Gilmore energetically objected to their implication. Lord Trowbridge asks, "Who are you to talk to me of the impression of my words?" Chapter 48. Mary Lowther returns to Bullhampton. At this time, the previously mopey Mr. Gilmore is noticeably more lively in general, believing, as does the vicar, that Mary is now going to accept him. Also in a good mood, the vicar writes a letter to Lord Trowbridge. I am informed that your lordship has stated openly that I have made visits to a young woman that are disgraceful to me, to my cloth, and to the parish. He demands both an apology for the calumny and a promise not to repeat it. Lord Trowbridge had not yet written the letter to the bishop that he had been contemplating, fearing that his son, St. George, would disapprove, and even wondering if he had been too hard on the vicar. Upon receipt of the vicar's letter, all doubt, caution, and mercy were thrown to the winds. Lord Trowbridge is outraged that the pestilent vicar addressed him in such an insolent fashion, yet failed to deny the facts. While his lordship is fulminating, Trollope breaks into the narration to tell us that Lord Trowbridge is not a bad man, but just an arrogant old fool who cannot keep himself from mischief. Lord Trowbridge now writes his letter to the bishop, enclosing the vicar's letter. The bishop returns the lord's letter, saying that he sees no need to interfere. Despite his impudent response to his lordship, the vicar is in fact deterred from visiting Carrie again. His wife makes a visit and finds Carrie still idle, except for wishing herself dead. Meanwhile, Mary Lowther is still struggling with herself. If she could not have love, could she content herself with doing her duty to others? Chapters 49 to 50. Mary Lowther's doom, and Mary Lowther inspects her future home. The beginning of chapter 49 feels to me like reader's doom. Again, we hear about Mary's struggles with her feelings. She is ashamed that she came to Bullhampton. She feels she has to accept Gilmore, having come there, but she is still not sure whether this is a good or bad thing. She settles on telling Gilmore the exact truth and letting him decide. She tells him she loved Walter Marrable dearly, that she loves him still, and that if he were free to marry her, she would go to him. Although Gilmore's brow mysteriously becomes black, he takes this statement as an acceptance of his proposal. Chapter 51, The Grinder and His Comrade. At the next magistrate's hearing, the vicar testifies that he had seen the three men in his garden. The constable reports that when he went to get Carrie, who had been subpoenaed to give evidence, the bird had flown. Sam testifies that he knew the men, but did not know their plans. The magistrates commit the Grinder and Acorn, but find insufficient evidence against Sam. When the vicar informs the miller that Sam is free, he responds grumpily, but tells the vicar he is in fact obliged to him. Chapter 52, Carrie Brattle's Journey. Carrie walks from Salisbury in the direction of Bullhampton, unsure where she will actually go. Trollope again breaks in to defend a character whom readers might be tempted to judge harshly, based on what Trollope himself has told us. He warns that the straight-going people in the world, I think that means the readers, are unreasonable to think that a person who has done wrong should lead a strictly constrained life. The time at Mrs. Stiggs had been very heavy for Carrie. On the second day of her long and tiring walk, Carrie thinks that even in her misery, it would be pleasant just to see her home again. And you guessed it, then perhaps throw herself in the millstream. Hiding outside the house, she sees her mother and sister rejoicing over Sam's being released. When they hear Carrie cry out, they pull her in through the window. Chapter 53, The Fatted Calf. Much hugging and kissing ensues. The women are determined to give Carrie shelter for at least one night before her father learns that she is there. In the morning, when Fan tells her father that Carrie is in the house, he will not see her because she has disgraced him. In all the world, there is none so vile as a harlot. Later that day, he relents a bit. She may stay with the family, although it means that he can never show his face again in the parish. Constable Toffee comes to the mill to tell Carrie that she is wanted, as she did not respond to her summons. But when he asks the miller if Carrie is there, the miller's short temper stands Carrie in good stead for once. He refuses Toffee entry into the house. Chapter 54, Mr. Gilmore's Rubies. Mary is still struggling to reconcile herself to her fate. Her gloominess makes Gilmore gloomy. Her attempts to seem pleased about a gift and on 2 tours of his house were failures. When she receives a magnificent set of rubies, which had belonged to Mr. Gilmore's mother, she asks him to come see the jewels, and for an hour he is happy. She again asks herself if she can go through with the marriage. She had thought it would be a good thing to be of service to someone, but she still worried that it would be sinful to live as the wife of a man she did not love. Aunt Marable writes to Mary that should anything happen to young Gregory, who is very ill, it appears Walter will be the heir and Edith Brownlow will be his wife. She shares other bad news. At Dunripple, they do not have the sort of chair Miss Marable likes, and she believes there is no green tea whatsoever in the house. This letter, urging her to name an early day, stiffens Mary's resolve to go on with the marriage. She would force herself to concede. She concludes that Walter has forgotten her, and she decides yet again to marry Gilmore. She would give up romance and focus on assuming her role as the squire's wife. Chapter 55, Glebland. Mr. Puddleham preaches his maiden sermon in the chapel, which is filled with both parishioners and the merely curious. Before leaving for his own church, the vicar reads a letter from Mr. Quickenham and learns that the plot on which the chapel stands is Glebland, to which Lord Trowbridge has no right. And I was concerned about the lost terrier. I don't know if anybody else was. I thought it was a dog, but it's a document that defines the extent of Gleblands. The vicar realizes he will look like an ass raising his claim at this late date, but it is his duty to protect the land for his successors. He decides he will never forgive Lord Trowbridge, but his triumph will be solely in the knowledge that the land is his. The chapel had been built for a good purpose, and he would not tear it down. The squire tells Mary that September is a good month to get married and go abroad. He is sure that Mary will love him by the end of their European tour. After another rehash of Mary's vacillation, we are told she had begun to think she would yield. Chapter 56, The Vicar's Vengeance. After they consult with the Reverend Chamberlain for no discernible reason, the vicar admits to Harry that he finds the chapel abominable. Therefore, he won't touch it. It will be his hair shirt. It will permit him to take the good things of the world while flattering himself that he is not self-indulgent. If others make him pull it down, that will be his hair shirt. The chapel was one thing, Lord Trowbridge was another. While the vicar did not want to disturb the chapel, he felt it his duty to disturb his lordship and set his heel on this pestilent wasp. The vicar writes to Lord Trowbridge that he has just learned that the plot is Glebland, and sarcastically confesses that he had been remiss in thinking that his lordship would know the limits of his own rights. However, now that the chapel was there, it would be a pity that it should be pulled down. He concludes that while his lordship exhibited gross ignorance, his real fault had been in the malice he had shown to a clergyman of his own church. When the Marquis received the letter, his wrath, quote, no writer of a simple prose narration should attempt to describe, unquote. Although his anger worked quickly, his intelligence worked slowly, and it took him a while to focus on the Glebe claim. Sure it was not true, he consults his lawyer. Chapter 57, Oil is to be thrown on the waters. Mr. Boothby's nose is a little out of joint that the firm had not been consulted about the gift of land, which was most irregular. He listens to Lord Trowbridge's complaints, but concludes that Fenwick is correct, that the chapel was built on Glebland. His lordship is distraught that he must submit and cannot strike back. His shame would be the vicar's triumph. Once again, St. George enters the scene in time to talk sense to his father. He agrees that the letter was impudent, but states that they had made a mistake. He volunteers to manage the situation by throwing oil upon the waters. Chapter 58, Edith Brownlow's Dream. Sir Gregory tells Edith, of whom he is very fond, that he would like to see her married. But Walter had not spoken to Edith. Consistently with Victorian rules for young ladies, she believes that girls ought not to think of men as lovers without a good deal of provocation, and should not give their hearts before they are asked for them. Walter tells her that he has heard from his uncle John that Mary does not love Gilmore. She says he should ask Mary directly. Chapter 59, News from Dunripple. Meanwhile, things in Bullhampton are gloomy again, or still, between Mary and Gilmore. Mary receives a letter from Walter saying that because his cousin Gregory is dead, he will leave the army altogether and assume the position of heir. He says further that he has been told that Mary has accepted Mr. Gilmore. Until you tell me so, I will not believe it, as I do not think you love him as you loved me. I will settle nothing as to my future life until I hear from you whether you will come back to me. Despite what her aunt had told her, Walter had never been untrue to her. She had told Gilmore what she would do if Walter would take her, and she did it. She could not marry Harry Gilmore. She could see now that with all her desire to do right, she had done foul wrong in accepting him. So the things I would like, I don't know that they're exactly questions, but they're things I'm curious about that people think. There, so much goes on in these chapters, but I feel like the active chapters alternate with the constant drumbeat of Mary's vacillation. And for me, each recital of it doesn't add anything. I just get kind of impatient with her, should I not? And I don't know. And that may just be that I'm mean. The other thing that's so interesting to me is that I think the vicar and his wife are by far the most interesting characters in the book. I mean, I think they put everyone else in the shade, and I like their relationship and their intelligence and their values. And I wonder if they overshadow Mary and Gilmore, and if so, is that on purpose? But I would think that their relationship, their marriage, is really one of the best in Trollope. I mean, Mrs. Fenwick doesn't have to be submissive. She can disagree with her husband. It seems very cordial between them. He tells her what he's thinking and doesn't say, it's none of your business, I'm the vicar. I really like them. And then the third thing is, I'm sorry that I'm so unsympathetic to Carrie. I don't think it's funny that people repeatedly threaten suicide, but to me, it just seems dramatic and performative. But more than that, Carrie seems to me kind of entitled. It seems to me that most Victorian women, even if they're married and very respectable, if they don't have children to keep them busy, they do needlework. So I don't understand why she's not making slippers for the vicar out of gratitude, why she's not making a tea cozy for Mrs. Stiggs. She's just choosing to sit there and say, I might as well kill myself, and to think that everybody should be running around trying to find her a home, which isn't the reformatory. So it's not that I think, her sin was bad, as Trollope would say. It's just that I think anyway, I think that's what I think of her. And I just really wonder how everyone else reacts to those things, or any other. Obviously, I'm interested in any other views you have.